Welcome to the September 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. I'll call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. And as I wait for my colleagues to come on screen, I just wanted to briefly mention that Chair Schwartz is having some technical difficulties and is hoping to be online shortly, but we'll kick off the meeting. Ms. Fennessy, can you do a roll call vote or roll call for the meeting?
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. I'll now start the roll call. Vice Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Bonderson.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins.
Present.
Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Lodge.
It would help if I turned my mic on. I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
And has Chair Schwartz returned?
It doesn't look like it.
Okay. I think she'll let us know when she returns. But thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So we'll move on to the next item, which is preliminary matters. And we will start with section A. And Ms. DeBus, do we have any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of an X agenda item?
Vice Chair Escobedo, we have none.
Thank you. And any announcements or appeals?
Yes, I did want to announce that the city will be issuing an emergency coastal development permit at 1429 Shoreline Drive. And that is to cut down a cypress tree that is in failing health. And so that permit will be issued on September the 8th. We've issued public notice and the tree is visible from Thousand Steps. So it's a fairly prominent location. So we just wanted to make the public aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBus. And so we'll move on to Part C, which is review, consideration, and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions. And we'll start with the August 12th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting minutes. And that also had resolutions for 630 Chapala and the number 00521 GMP non-residential allocation from the meeting on August 12th. Are there any amendments to the minutes or resolution? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
I can second.
So a first from Commissioner Wiscombe, second from Commissioner Bonderson. Any discussion? I'm seeing none. Ms. Tennessee, can you do a roll call vote?
Thank you. And I'll start the roll call vote. Commissioner Bonderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Escobedo.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes.
thank you. And so we'll move on to the August 19th Planning Commission minutes. And that is accompanied with the Planning Commission resolution 00621 for 501 Ninos Drive, Dwight Murphy Field. And then also Planning Commission resolution number 00721 1309 State Street. Are there any amendments to the minutes or the attached resolution?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Lodge.
Apparently I misspoke in my report on the Creeks Restoration Committee and called it the Creeks Restoration and Advisory Committee. So on page 5, at the bottom of the page, I asked Ms. Fennessy to remove restoration, and so it's just Creeks Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. And you sent that to Ms. Fennessy prior to the meeting, so she has that.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. any other amendments to the Planning Commission meeting minutes or the resolution? Doesn't look like we have any. Do I have a motion to approve?
Yeah, yes, I'll make a motion to approve the August 19th, 2021 minutes and as amended by Commissioner Lodge and the accompanying resolution. Thank you.
I can second that.
Thank you. So we have a first from Commissioner Wiscombe and a second from Commissioner Bonderson with the amendment that Commissioner Lodge had mentioned. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll now start the roll call vote. Commissioner Higgins,
Abstain. I was absent.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes,
Commissioner Bonderson,
Yes, thank you.
and Vice Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And so now we'll move on to public comment that is not related to items that are on today's agenda. Mr. Buss, do we have anyone that would like to give public comment?
Thank you. For members of the public that are joined by webinar, if you'd like to give a public comment on an item not on today's agenda, please click the raise lower hand icon in the GoToWebinar control panel. And everyone has 2 minutes to speak. At this time, I'm not seeing any members of the public that would like to make comment. So Ms. Fennessy, have we received any written correspondence?
Thank you, Mr. Busk. We received general public comment from Ann Hubbard that was distributed to the commission prior to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll close public comment and we'll move on to our item for today, which is item number 3. It's a continued item from July 8th, 2021, and it's 805 Cliff Drive, Habitat Restoration Status Report, where the Planning Commission will receive a status report on the Honda Valley Monarch Butterfly Habitat Restoration and Monitoring Plan for the 801 Cliff Drive project. And yes, Commissioner Hagan.
Quick disclosure, I had ex parte site visit with the applicant and the biologist yesterday.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. All right, and so from staff, do we have Mr. Bowman who's giving the presentation today?
Hi, yes, Vice Chair
Hi, Mr.
Escobedo,
Bowman.
I'm here.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Hello, Commissioners. This item is for the purpose of this item is for the Planning Commission to hear a habitat restoration status report for 801 Cliff Drive. And I prepared this PowerPoint presentation with the purpose of giving some background, particularly the images. I think our staff report and attaching the older 2016 staff report that approved the coastal development permit for the project provided lots of background information. So in this PowerPoint, I've got some slides that kind of illustrate the project before and after the enforcement violations occurred. Next slide, please. So the project here is outlined in yellow. It's, well, this image or this map kind of highlights Santa Barbara City College. All the parts of this map where you see building footprints, that's all City College. So the project's located in very close proximity to the college. And since the present owner purchased the property, he's kind of turned it into a specific student rental housing project. It was originally developed, the zoning is R2, but the apartment buildings were developed as garden apartments back in the original complex was built in 1970, and then it was converted to garden apartments with the 3 smaller buildings added in 1980. It was kind of a quiet, under the radar, older apartment complex. And then when the owner took it over, he gave it kind of a major overhaul and updated things and made it more appealing to the students and student lifestyle. Next slide, please.
Mr. Hamilton. Oh, thank you.
Okay, there we go. This is the same thing, just the aerial view. So next slide. So when the Planning Commission approved the coastal development permit in 2016, a condition of approval shown on the screen here was for the project environmental coordinator to return to the Planning Commission at a public hearing at year 3 and year 5 for status reports on the restoration plan. Today's hearing doesn't involve any action by the Planning Commission, just to hear the report. And Mr. Hunt's report is titled Year 2, although it's, well, we've had one of the problems that we'll discuss is a lack of timely reporting. So anyway, when this Year 2 report was given to us, it was approximately 3 years had lapsed or passed since the restoration plantings had been installed. So now is the appropriate time for this Year 3 update as required by the condition. Next slide, please. So for the background, in 2014 is when the city took enforcement action on the property. A large violation that got a lot of people's attention was unpermitted tree removals of many really large mature eucalyptus trees at the southern part of the site behind the apartment buildings, and major alterations to the buildings and to the site and the landscaping all around the site. It was a very long list of violations in the notice of violation letter. So the city began working with the owner to resolve the enforcement. The project is located in the coastal zone south of Cliff Drive and partially in the appealable jurisdiction where the stream habitat area runs through the southern part of the site. So it required a coastal development permit. There were some modifications that were fairly minor. There were some front setback encroachments, although the front property line is well back from the street into what you would assume to be the private property. So the modifications were not a big part of the discussion of that project approval. It also included ABR review and approval of the project. So 32 of these big eucalyptus trees were removed from the rear of the site, southern area. Next slide, please. And those eucalyptus trees were part of the composition of a pretty large monarch butterfly overwintering site known as Honda Valley. It was recognized as the largest overwintering site in Santa Barbara County. Used to be a pretty good congregation of butterflies there in the winter. Part of the approval in 2016, or probably a pretty large part of it, was the habitat restoration plan that included the required monitoring and reporting, and today's hearing is part of that reporting. Next slide, please. So the habitat restoration plan had a lot of consideration and took quite a while to prepare. The project biologist, Larry Hunt, is here today. And Mr. Hunt had some input and consultation with a Dr. Dan Mead, who is a well-known biologist as being an expert in monarch butterflies. He reviewed Mr. Hunt's work and provided some input in the restoration plan. Fish and Wildlife Service participated. Their staff came out on at least one site visit that I remember. The state approved a stream bed alteration agreement as part of this project. That was a state level approval. They had a good bit of input and comment on the restoration plan. And our staff environmental analyst worked a lot on this. That was Steve Greer at the time. He's no longer here at the city, but so a pretty good team, pretty large team of people worked on the habitat restoration plan. The owner had, when he cut down the eucalyptus trees, he installed 60 box Coast Live oak trees in the area where the eucalyptus trees were removed. That was, that tree planting was incorporated in the plan. And fortunately, that was found to be a good thing and consistent with the plan, et cetera. But it wasn't part of the plan to decide to do that. The owner had done that before the plan was created. So in total, the plan involved 215 new trees and 3,000 other plants. A lot of the other plants were intended to provide nectar that monarch butterflies favored and other native plants to enhance the riparian habitat, not just for butterflies, but overall. And the monitoring was intended to keep an eye on and track the planting success, the success rate and growth of all those plants that were installed. And another part of the monitoring was to do systematic and regular counting of the monarch numbers, how many monarchs are observed at the site. Next slide, please. Relatively recently, I think it was back in May or so, we've been more recently since late summer, fall of 2020, we've kind of had a renewed effort or a coordinated effort among city staff to start enforcing to get these old violations resolved. But anyway, City College staff went out with city police and city fire, planning division, building and safety. We all went out and walked around because we had heard reports that there were encampments down in that creek area. And we saw them. What we found was all the encampments were on the City College side of the creek. And City College, as far as I know, they've been working to relocate those people that have been camping out down there. It's kind of a fire risk to have people in there, as well as a disruption to habitat to have people in there. The habitat, it doesn't follow the property line necessarily. So there's some habitat on the City College side. Where the actual creek bed runs through there, the property line more or less follows it. It kind of crisscrosses it a little bit, but it's roughly in the location of the actual water course. So a lot of the habitat areas on City College property. So overall, the restoration plantings have been performing well. One problem we've had is that weeding was not performed in 2020 at all. There was an excuse given that COVID had something to do that. We don't really think COVID is a very good excuse, but anyway, we're planning to get the weeding back on track and caught up. Well, in fact, I think there has been some recent weeding to get some of that taken care of or caught up. But overall, I think nationwide and regionally and everywhere, the monarch butterfly population is way, way down, including this site. And there were no wintering monarchs observed here last winter at all. Next slide, please. If you've read the the update report, some of the outstanding items that still need work. There's corrective items. Well, I just mentioned the weed removal. Going forward, we plan to get that done regularly to stay on top of that so that the restoration plantings thrive and they're not competing with weeds. There's some storm drain structures. The original ones that have been there probably since the apartment complex has been there are not very well designed and they're not working well. The approved project included some pretty elaborately engineered structures to replace them. From what I understand, the owner currently has an engineer working on a different design that might be a little less elaborate. If you have questions on that, I think maybe the owner's representative or Mr. Hunt could maybe answer what the plan is for those. Educational signage, the intention there was the perimeter fencing between the restoration area and the developed part of the site. There's been some trouble or problems with students going into the habitat restoration area or throwing trash over the fence down into the restoration area. So the thought was to make people aware of what that area is and why it needs to be respected and taken care of. So I'm currently working with the applicant. We've come up with a design for the signs and they're currently being fabricated by a sign contractor. The same fence line that I just mentioned, vines were not planted until very recently to provide screening, like for car headlights, et cetera, or lighting from the apartments, to try to just provide a little screening for the habitat area. And then we've had problems. I mentioned that we're looking at a report labeled year 2 at year 3. So we've had problems with timely reporting. So we're hoping to get that back on track. The approved plan was a little vague in the reporting timing. It always referred to fall of year 1 or summer of year 2, etc. So I went through that pretty carefully and came up with specific quarterly dates. So we've got, for example, July 15th and October 15th. So we've set specific calendar dates so everybody knows what the deadline is for these reports. Next slide. So now to the images. So this is a closer view of the site. You see Cliff Drive and Loma Alta Drive labeled, and all those trees to the south. Somewhere in that mass of trees is the stream and the southern property line. And then south of that, I think in another image, we'll see a little bit of City College property. So this was prior to 2014. I think this might be 2012, something like that. And then next slide, please. And then this is pretty close to a current aerial image of the same view of the property. The lighting is a bit different between these images, so this is not as denuded as it appears, but there was a large amount of tree canopy removed, both from around the buildings and in the creek area. So the trees at the bottom of this image that remain kind of to the lower right, the trees that remain are on City College property. And then as we go toward the west, the lower left, the owner left a good many of the eucalyptus trees on his property. Next slide, please. And here I've just highlighted kind of what the restoration area is. Next slide. This is another source of aerial images. You can see this is, they call it a bird's eye view at Microsoft Bing Maps. So again, this is an older image before the current owner owned the property. And this one really gives you a good sense of the trees that were there before. And also take a look at the buildings and see how they look. And then let's go to the next slide for a comparison. So probably comparing these two slides kind of in a nutshell is the project description. Here you see where the trees have been removed in the restoration area and a lot of the trees around the developed area of the site. Some of the larger trees along Loma Alta remain out along that street frontage. And many, probably hundreds of palm trees were installed. The buildings, the architectural style of the buildings had changed somewhat, the detailing on the buildings. And then over toward Loma Alta, those white looking structures, they're slabs of concrete. There were various, like a patio area and some ping pong table court areas, bocce ball, etc. A lot of just site structure, site improvements, amenities, I guess you could say, for the students. Fortunately for the owner, the ABR, they were pretty well in favor of all that. They liked all those improvements, I would say. Next slide, please.
Mr. Hamilton.
Oh, again, I just highlighted that restoration area. Next slide, please. So to introduce our project environmental coordinator, Mark De La Garza of Watershed Environmental is here. And also Larry Hunt, the restoration biologist, is here for questions. Next slide, please. Or that might be the final slide. Okay, I think that's it for staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. And do we have another presentation from the owners group?
Yes, Mark De La Garza is here.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Mr. De La Garza, feel free to, hey, how's it going? I think you're muted.
Hello, as Tony said, my name is Mark De La Garza. I'm a consulting biologist with Watershed Environmental. I am the project environmental coordinator. Basically, my role in this project is to review the reports that Larry Hunt prepares, provide written comment to the city, and to let the city know if the reports are not done in a timely manner and if things are outstanding from the previous reports, to remind Larry and the city about what those outstanding items may be. I also visit the site after I receive the reports and just verify, the information that's contained in the reports. So I've been a practicing professional biologist in the city and the county of Santa Barbara for about 20+ years. And I do a lot of habitat restoration work and permitting in the coastal zone and in inland areas of Santa Barbara County. I'd be happy to answer any questions if the Planning Commission members have about this project. I think overall it's going pretty well. We were finally getting some of the outstanding items completed. There's only 2 things I believe that Tony mentioned that are still outstanding: the signs and improvements to the storm drain water conveyance systems.
All right. And then I believe Mr. Hunt is also here on the call. Mr. Hunt, if you wanted to come on and introduce yourself as well. I believe you're muted, Mr. Hunt. Still muted. Mr. Busk, is there a way for us to unmute him on our end?
Mr. Hunt, I sent you an unmute request, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
I'm,
There you go.
okay, there we go. There we go. It took a while. Okay, Lawrence Hunt. I'm a consulting biologist. I prepared the restoration plan and implemented the plan. And I'm available here today to answer any questions that may come up. But Tony and Mark De La Garza, I think, are pretty much running the show here with regards to outstanding issues. I think Tony has given a good summary of any outstanding issues that are out there. The biggest ones being right now is the storm drains, which need repair, remediation, and that will be done before the upcoming rainy season this year. The restoration effort itself is going extremely well. It's a challenging site because it's on a 45-degree slope, very sandy soil, highly erodible. As Tony mentioned, we planted over 3,000 plants, including the trees, 3,200 plants. The restoration effort itself is going really well in terms of percent cover. The amount of weed growth is very, very low relative to native plants. And the site is much improved wildlife habitat than what was there before, including what was there with the eucalyptus grove. I think Tony mentioned that there's been huge regional declines, continental-wide declines in monarch butterflies. That's another issue. But the habitat is restored there now and is sort of waiting for them because the emphasis was on nectar sources for adult butterflies. Let's see. I think that's it. Anyway, I'm here. I'm available here for answering any questions. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you both, Mr. De La Garza and Mr. Hunt. I'm going to ask you both to go offline briefly while we move on to public comment, and I'll ask my colleagues to come online. Mr. Busk, does it look like we have anyone from the public that would like to give public comment on this item?
Vice Chair Escobedo, it does not, but we will give it just a minute in case. So for anyone joined by the webinar, if you'd like to make a public comment, please click the raise lower hand icon on the control panel. And not seeing any, but I did want to let the public know if they wanted to become listed as an interested party for this item, you can contact us. You can submit an email request or give us a call or a written request. All the information is on this slide, and it can also be found on our agendas. So just contact us if you want more to stay involved with this project. Still seeing no members of the public wanting to give public comment. Ms. Fennessy, have you received any written correspondence?
Thank you, Mr. Busk. We did not receive any written correspondence for this item.
Thank you. And we'll turn it over to the commission for questions, and it looks like Commissioner Wiscombe wants to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair Escobedo. I didn't want to go first with questions or anything, but I did want to acknowledge the fact that we did receive public correspondence before the item got continued. I know we received written correspondence from Mary Turley. And I think that's it, but I think that should be part of the record, even though it was submitted back when we originally had the item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. I really appreciate that. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Vice. These are for Mr. De La Garza. There was reference to storm drains that have to be cleared, and on page 119 of the staff report, it refers to remediation action regarding the culverts. It says the stones will be removed from the culverts and stabilization will take place in May, June 2021. Is that the same thing as the storm drains? And if not, has the work been done on the culverts?
Yes, Commissioner Lodge, that is the same thing. They're open metal culverts. They're basically cut in half, and they convey water down to the bottom of the channel. And the stones need to be removed and the storm drain system redesigned. And I believe a civil engineering firm is doing that now. That work is hopefully going to get completed before the rainy season starts.
Okay, thank you. Another question was in your cover letter of August 24th, 2020. You said that the Monterey cypress that died should be replanted in the fall of 2020. I gather that did not happen, or did it?
That's correct. It did not happen. And I'd have to say that given the growth that's been experienced in this site with the trees that have already been planted, I don't believe there's enough space, physical space, to plant those Monterey cypress trees at this time. The trees that have been planted have gotten quite large.
Okay. Well, I was very pleased to see the photographs showing how well the plants are doing, where they are doing well. That was really very encouraging. The comments earlier today. Okay, so you don't think there's room for them or need for them? I know they were referred to at the ABR hearing on Mr. St. George's request to not plant the Monterey cypress that were in the approved landscape plan in the frontage and on the site itself, and replacing and approving the palm trees that I guess he's already planted, but they said absolutely not. So,
Yeah.
Hopefully those other Monterey cypress will get planted and be properly tended to so that they thrive as the ones across the street on the City College property are doing. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Higgins?
For question for Mr. Baumann, have you been out to the site lately?
I would say I've been out there probably within the past 2 weeks. I go out there way more than I would like to. But.
Okay. I noticed there's some encampments or trash heaps, probably not on the subject parcel. Hard to tell, but what's been the city's reaction to or ability to clean that or remove that? I ask in context of kind of the different approach the city's taken the last couple of months, and also importantly in context of the basis for the project, which if you remember, the applicant did acknowledge that the trees were a fire hazard, especially related to lots of homeless encampments. That was, I won't say the basis for the tree removal, but that was part of the discussion. So what we have here is kind of back to where we were with a kind of successful restoration, but we're also back to where we were with encampments and sort of an infinity loop here. So can you help me with whether or not the cities can be active out there to clean the encampments and trash heaps?
Well, when we went out there sometime in May, all the camping that we saw was on the City College side of the creek, but we've been having, myself and Building and Safety and the City Attorney's Office have been having approximately monthly meetings with the applicant to talk about progress and, cross items off the list in terms of violations. But at our last meeting, we talked about a new item, like a new enforcement item to be added to the list. And the biologist had reported there were latrines on the subject property in the restoration area on the subject site. So we haven't really decided how to handle that. That's a tough problem, but that is kind of like you just said, it's just a continuing problem. And this was a new report to staff that this is still happening, or at least these latrines that were reportedly seen on the property.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. I know it's not really a planning commission issue, you know, especially considering this is an item that is not up for a decision today, but I think your point about what's going on out there now, all of that runs counter to what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Other questions from the commission? Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask Mr. Baumann about this procedure, and Commissioner Lodge alluded to it. I think that a request was made by the owner. This is on page 2 of the staff report at the very top. A request was made by the owner on June 15, 2021 to request date palm trees as a substitute. And this will go to the ABR for comments and then to Planning Commission hearing for comments prior to Community Development Director consideration of a substantial conformist determination. Can you tell me what the status is? I'm gathering from Commissioner Lodge's comments that ABR said absolutely not. Is that correct?
Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, I can debrief on that. So the application was received on June 15th. It went to the ABR on July 26th. And the owner, he's never really wanted to replace or to install the Monterey cypress canopy trees on the developed area of the site. Now, just to keep people from getting confused, we've been treating this site as 2 separate areas. There's the habitat restoration below the top of the creek bank on the south part of the site. And then everything from the parking lot curb north, the parking lot, all the buildings, all that landscaping around the buildings, all the site amenities, we've been referring to that as the developed area of the site. So right now we're talking about the Monterey cypress on the developed area of the site to be planted around the buildings, in particular along both street frontages to kind of soften and screen the apartment buildings from the street view. So the owner proposed to, instead of Monterey cypress, to plant date palms. I forget the species. They're not the invasive species, but the non-invasive date palm trees. Because he likes that palm tree theme and the beach city, for the beach city atmosphere, I guess. So that type of palm tree is a relatively big canopy for a palm tree. So the ABR considered that request. I've got the minutes here in front of me that the ABR took a straw vote. How many board members feel that the changes are in substantial conformance? 0 to 7. So they all voted against that. Then they took another straw vote because there was some discussion about whether Monterey cypress were the best type of a canopy tree and whether there should be consideration to other, non-palm trees, but, multi-limbed canopy trees. And that straw vote failed. And then a straw vote, how many board members can support the planting of date palms within the property, but not around the perimeter? And that was 7-0 in favor to allow the owner to have the date palms in the interior area of the site where they weren't really publicly visible outside the site. That passed, but that was immediately followed by a motion by the ABR. They said continue indefinitely to full board with the comment that the 27 Monterey cypress trees shall be installed as previously proposed and approved. And that was a 7-0 vote. So that's where it left off. And I've since been working with the owner's agent to figure out what the owner would like to do, because we've got a straw vote from the ABR saying they could accept some date palms in the interior of the site and then the vote itself saying, well, all 27 of the Monterey cypress have to be installed as approved. So the 27 cypress trees were largely around the perimeter, but also in the interior of the site. So we're currently working on, you know, I was telling the owner he should just decide what he wants to do and run it by the ABR again. But, oh, in fact, I got an update. I don't know if Mr. Roy, the agent for the owner, is present. But he just told me the owner has recently, very recently, planted all 27 Monterey cypress. So I'll be looking into that. So I think the owner's just going to go with the ABR motion to plant the Monterey cypress as approved, but I'll have to find that out because I just heard that a little while ago today that he has planted the trees.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they are complying with the submitted landscape plan then by planting the 27 Monterey cypress.
It looks like it. I know the intention from the owner was to avoid a substantial conformance hearing with the Planning Commission and just go or either adhere exactly to the approved plan or something very close to it.
Okay, so I appreciate that, Mr. Baumann. So when you say in your staff report that this will go to the ABR, it's been to the ABR for comments, and then to the Planning Commission hearing for comments, that you mean today, is that correct?
No, that would have been a hearing just for input from the Planning Commission on a substantial conformance determination for a change of tree species.
Okay.
It looks like we're not going to do that though, or looks like we're not going to need to do that.
Okay, okay, that was my question because it came out, I think in the original letter from the applicant's agent, that and it's in Mary Turley's letter that she submitted back in July, that the Monterey cypress are an alternate habitat for monarchs. Now, I understand this is outside of the habitat restoration area, but I think that was a point made. I wasn't on Planning Commission then, but I think that was a point made at that Planning Commission meeting that they wanted Monterey cypress for that reason. So I just, and I don't know whether if they come back, if the monarchs come back, if they'll migrate off into those areas where the Monterey cypress are being outside of the restoration area where they're being planted, but I think that's an important consideration. So that was the point of my question. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And that's really all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wisdom. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. Back in, I think it was April of 2016, when this project came before the Planning Commission, there was discussion at that time, and the Planning Commission said it wanted the applicant's representative proposed 10 canopy trees at that time, on the Loma Alta and Cliff Drive frontages that were to be Monterey cypress. They proposed them then. About a month later, and the Planning Commission said, okay, only double that number. You know, we want 20. About a month later, we got a letter from the representative, Suzanne Elledge, saying that the Monterey cypress would be planted, that they were, and why they were good for the site. And, you know, and I thought the matter was taken care of. Some years later, Mr. St. George called me about some other subject. And while we were talking, I asked him what happened to the Monterey cypress that had never gotten planted. And he said, oh, I love Monterey cypress. Well, he's apparently changed his mind, but I'm really glad that the ABR insisted that they do what they offered to do 5 years ago. And I'm really glad to hear that they have been planted. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Other questions from my colleagues? Let's give it a second. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions from my colleagues, I do have one for Mr. Bauman, but maybe also Mr. Best, is the goal of the restoration plan is to hopefully provide an environment similar to what existed before that would allow the monarch butterflies to come during the winter and use that as an ecosystem. Are we evaluating as this restoration plan continues and we approach that 5-year mark? Let's say in the 4th year, in the 5th year, when we evaluate, we still aren't seeing monarch butterflies. Are we going to continue to work with the applicant or the property owner to adjust that restoration plan to try our best to tweak the approach to maybe provide an environment that would bring the monarch butterflies back? Or is it out of our hands after that 5-year point?
Vice Chair Escobedo, that's part of what this monitoring and reporting is all about. And the plan allows for, I guess you could call it adaptive management or that kind of adjusting. But we've got our expert here, Mr. Hunt. It might be great to hear his comments on your question since he's here.
Yeah, that'd be great. Mr. Hunt.
Yes. As we've said several times in this meeting, the monarch butterflies have suffered kind of a decline, a catastrophic decline really throughout the Western United States. And so there's a lot of factors that are bringing to bear why we're not seeing any butterflies in the Santa Barbara area. And this includes Goleta. I just wanted to correct something that Mr. Bauman said. The site at Honda Valley that we're talking about is not the largest monarch butterfly aggregation site in the county. That is actually the Elwood Grove of eucalyptus in Goleta. This was the largest grove within the city limits of Santa Barbara. And so the declines have been on the order, several orders of magnitude, from a high of maybe 2,500 to 3,000 butterflies at the restoration site when we first began, to 0 to just a handful of butterflies now. I expect that to continue through year 5, unless something changes on a statewide level or continent-wide level that's responsible for the decline in the butterflies. So what in year 5, we've been thinking about this. The habitat is there. It would be good to, obviously, to ensure the quality remains the same. And so probably the most effective strategy would be to control non-native vegetation, weeds and things like that in the area that would degrade the habitat quality of the area for butterflies. So essentially, we're sort of building a butterfly field of dreams that if they come back, the habitat is great for them. In the meantime, the habitat itself is very high quality for other wildlife, particularly the birds. So that is the strategy going forward, is that maintain the habitat quality by controlling non-native vegetation and hope we get some recovery of monarchs.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and I really appreciate that explanation, there will be ongoing maintenance of this habitat to make sure that it stays at or as close as possible to the quality of environment that it is at currently.
Right.
Beyond
and
the 5 years.
Right. That would involve going through the area twice a year, removing weeds and things like that. That should probably be sufficient to keep things under control. The other thing that's maybe mitigating against it, as we've discussed, is the homeless encampments. And if those continue to get worse, that has a bearing on habitat quality. So that would have to be monitored too. Hopefully that can be ameliorated. But yeah.
And during those times when you're obviously going out there much more often now, and I'm just thinking beyond that 5 years. Would you be communicating with the city on the status of the habitat to let them know if it is doing really well, or also for the encampments as well, letting the city know and informing them about things that the city might be able to contribute to make sure that we preserve the habitat?
I plan on incorporating that information in the quarterly reports that we're going to be doing, and then it'll be summarized in the annual report. But going forward after year 5, it could be done in, say, a 1 or 2 reports a year, just a brief letter report. Here's the status of what's going on, something like that.
Okay.
I think that could easily be incorporated.
And so right now there's no requirement for that, but it's definitely something that it sounds like it's something you're open to.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I really appreciate that. And then
Thank you.
Mr. Bauman, I guess a question for you is related to that matter. In what way can we reach out for those reports beyond that 5-year mark, so that we get the status reports of how the habitat's doing and whether or not the monarch butterflies are making it back, and ways we can contribute?
I'll have to consider that and read the approved restoration plan and what it calls for, because I do remember a clause in that report. There was some sort of contingency that it could extend beyond 5 years. I think that might have been tied to maybe a lower level of performance of the plantings. If the plantings are doing very well, I'm not sure. There's a clause in the report, the approved report, that would allow for that kind of time continuance. But we still have these concerns about not receiving timely reports. Maybe that could be a nexus, since we missed some past reports, to make up for them with future reports. I'll have to talk to our team, meaning in this case, our staff environmental analyst and Ms. DeBusk and our city attorney, assistant city attorneys that's been helping us with enforcement, to see if we could do that.
I would be very interested in that, in particular between now and the 5-year report, looking into, is there a way that we can require ongoing reports beyond the 5 years to make sure that the habitat is maintained at the same or as near as possible to the same quality it is currently in the near future.
Right, I'll keep that in mind for our next enforcement meeting.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the commission? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Bauman. Thank you, Mr. De La Garza and Mr. Hunt. And I believe that concludes this item. And we can now move on. Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. I just wanted to say that I thought the photos were very impressive in the reports, and I really appreciated them. And I think that, a photo really tells a great story. So I wanted to thank the project team for that. And I also want to say that I like and would support your idea of continuation beyond the 5 years. I would hate to see this site after 5 years not weeded and just degraded. And so I think I would urge the staff and the team to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Lodge?
I'd like to second what you and Commissioner Wiscombe said. It needs to be kept in view and to assure that it stays the way that it's supposed to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. other comments before we close out on this item? Give it one more second. And Mr. Buss, do we open up public comment before we close out this item? That just occurred to me. Or did we already do that? I apologize.
Vice Chair Escobedo, we already did that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close out this item and we will move on to the administrative agenda with committee and liaison reports. Mr. Higgins, do we have a staff hearing officer liaison report today?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Mostly ADUs and modifications in the last couple of meetings.
Thank you. Commissioner Bonderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one ABR date to report on August 23rd. We had an ABR meeting with two interesting items I'd like to share. The first one is worth noting because in March of this year, 2021, the city was awarded with a grant that's called the Local Early Action Planning Grant. And what that does is it allows us to create an objective design standards for multi-unit housing projects. The project includes the formation of a stakeholder work group. So one of the items that was that took place on August 23rd was that staff had requested the appointment of 2 ABR members, which was done. Vice Chair Six and Board Member Black were appointed. So that was just something I wanted to share with you all. Thought it was pretty interesting and important to know. And the second is a project. As always, we have projects, and this is a conceptual review for 618 Olive Street, and it is a proposal for a new multi-unit residence. This project here uses the AUD program, and what it entails is converting an existing 3 apartment units into 4 units by adding a new 2-bedroom unit to the property. And the proposed density is 17 dwelling units per acre because this falls into the medium high density residential area, which allows between 15 and 27. So they're in that range with 17. And the nice thing is that it also introduces new bike lockers, which we're always happy to see around town. So that project came in for conceptual review, and of course it was continued indefinitely with comments. So we will see that again in the future. That's all I have to report today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee or liaison reports? All right, I'm not seeing any. So with that, this must be a record. That will be the last item for today's meeting, and we can adjourn at 2:04. Everyone have a great long weekend. Be safe out there. Jay, you especially.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good job.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.